At 1:47 in the morning, a shadow approached her door. Then her security camera went dark, her pacemaker app disconnected, and an 84-year-old mother of three simply vanished. Welcome to Buried Archives. We dig into cases that were never meant to be found. If you are new here and you enjoy the videos, make sure to subscribe. So, let's get straight to it. Tucson, Arizona. If you were going to choose a place to grow old in peace, you could hardly do better than this. The crime rates are remarkably low, the streets are quiet, lined with adobe-style homes, and manicured with desert landscaping. Nancy Guthrie had called this area home for more than 50 years. She'd watched the desert bloom and fade through half a century of seasons. She'd raised three children here after her husband died unexpectedly in 1988. She'd become a pillar of her community, a regular at her local church, and a grandmother with a sharp mind and a gentle spirit. But on night of February 1st, 2026, everything would change. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27, 1942 in Fort Wright, Kentucky, a small city across Ohio River from Cincinnati. The America she entered was a nation at war, and Kentucky, where she grew up in, was a place of rolling hills, tight-knit communities, and traditional values. Little is publicly known about her early years, but those who knew her as a woman of deep faith and quiet determination. She met Charles Guthrie, and together they would build a life that would eventually carry them across the country to the Arizona desert. In the early 1970s, the Guthrie family made a journey west. Settling in the Tucson area, Charles worked in a mine exploration, a career that took him to remote corners in the world. Nancy raised three children, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron. The oldest, Savannah, would go to become one of the most recognizable faces in American television, where she would be earning a degree in law from Georgetown University. She pivoted to journalism, eventually becoming the co-anchor of NBC Today's show, one of the most watched morning programs in the country. But in February 2026, Savannah wasn't a celebrity journalist. She was a daughter, desperate for her mother. Tragedy has visited the Guthrie family before. In 1988, Charles Guthrie died at just the age of 49 during a mining exploration trip in Mexico. The loss left Nancy Guthrie as a widow in her mid-40s, raising three children alone. She never remarried. Instead, she poured herself into her children, her grandchildren, and her faith. Those who knew her described her as a mentally sharp and independent woman who, even at the age of 84, insisted on living alone in the house where she spent most of her adult life. By 2026, Nancy might have had a mind that was very keen, but she had limited mobility and couldn't walk for more than 50 yards without assistance. She required daily medication for a chronic condition and wore a pacemaker that connected to an app to her phone. But despite these physical limitations, Nancy maintained her independence. She took Ubers to visit her daughter, she attended church every single Sunday without failure, and she was by all accounts living her final chapter with grace and dignity. At 5:32 p.m. in the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy called an Uber and she was heading to her daughter Annie's home for dinner, a routine she cherished, spending time with her family before settling in a quiet Saturday night. And at around 9:48 p.m., Nancy's son-in-law and his husband drove her home. They pulled up into her driveway, and at around 9:48 p.m., her garage door opened. 2 minutes later, at 9:50 p.m., her garage door closed. On Sunday morning, February 1st, in homes across the Catalina foothills, alarm clocks buzzed and coffee makers gurgled. Families prepared for church, for brunch, and for a lazy winter weekend. At Nancy Guthrie's church, the congregation began at gather. Hymnals were opened, prayers were whispered, and in the new pew where Nancy had sat every Sunday for decades, there was an empty space. At first, perhaps no one thought much of it. Maybe she was feeling under the weather, maybe she overslept. These things happen, even to the most reliable among us. But Nancy Guthrie didn't miss church, not for 50 years. not unless something terribly went wrong. Sometime around 11 a.m., a member of Nancy's congregation made a call. She made a call for Guthrie's family. Nancy hadn't appeared as expected. Was she alright? Had something happened? At 11:56 a.m., relatives arrived at Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills, and what they found, or rather what they didn't found, would launch one of the most intensive investigations in Arizona history. Nancy wasn't there, but everything she would have needed to leave was. Her purse, her phone, her medication, her essentials, all left behind. For a woman who couldn't walk 50 yards unassisted, there was no scenario in which she had simply decided to go on a morning stroll. At 12:03 p.m., the Guthrie family called 911. My grandmother is missing. She's 84 years old and she can't walk on her own. She never came to church this morning, and when we went to check on her, she was just gone. Within minutes, deputies of the Pima County Sheriff's Department were on their way. Deputy Sheriff Chris Nanos had seen a lot in his career. Missing person cases, domestic disputes, the full spectrum of human tragedy that defines police work. But from the moment his deputies stepped inside Nancy Guthrie's home, they knew something was different. The conditions inside were, in his word, inconsistent with voluntary disappearance. This wasn't a case of an elderly woman wandering off in confusion. Nancy had no cognitive impairments. This wasn't a medical emergency that has resulted in hospitalization. Her phone and medications were still at his house. Most disturbing of the forensic evidence was a video footage captured by media outlets that would later show what appeared to be a trail of blood near the front door. Forensic testing would confirm what investigators feared the most. The DNA matched Nancy Guthrie. At this point, the investigators believed she was taken from her home against her will, possibly in the middle of the night. Taken against her will includes possible kidnapping or abduction. She couldn't walk 50 yards by herself. The implications were staggering. Someone had entered Nancy Guthrie's home while she slept, caused injury during the abduction, and then transported her out of the house and away from the neighborhood, all without triggering any alarms or alerting any neighbors. But perhaps the most telling detail was what was missing. Nancy's doorbell security camera has been physically removed from the property. Someone had known it was there. Someone had taken the steps to eliminate the evidence. By afternoon of February 1st, the Pima County Sheriff's Department had made a critical decision. This was no longer a search operation. It was a criminal investigation. Homicide detectives were called along the search, and rescue teams as well. The search for Nancy Guthrie expanded rapidly. K9 units swept across the neighborhood and the surrounding deserts. Drones equipped with thermal cameras scanned the rugged terrain, and helicopters crisscrossing the Arizona sky. But despite these massive efforts, there was no sign of Nancy Guthrie. No body, no sighting, no indication of where she might have been or been taken to. And then came the FBI. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation joins a local missing persons case, it sends a clear message. This is not a routine investigation. The FBI's involvement signals this is a federal crime, a kidnapping across the state lines, or the case has implications that has been extended beyond what local law enforcement can handle alone. In the case of Nancy Guthrie, the FBI's involvement began almost immediately. The nature of the disappearance and apparent abduction of the evidence of violence, combined with the high-profile nature of the victim's family, made the federal assistance not just helpful, but essential. Nancy Guthrie wasn't an 84-year-old grandmother. She was the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. In the world of cable news and morning television, Savannah was a household name. Her mother's disappearance would generate national media attention. The FBI brought resources that the Pima County Sheriff's Department simply didn't have. Forensic specialists, digital analysis teams, a national-wide database of DNA samples and fingerprints. And the most important part, experience with high-stake kidnapping investigations. Within days, the investigators had confirmed the blood that was found at the scene belonged to Nancy Guthrie. They had analyzed the security camera systems, not only Nancy's, but those of her neighbors as well. By February 5th, the FBI announced a $50,000 reward for information about Nancy's location or the identifications of those who are responsible for her disappearance. 4 days into the investigation, with full resources, the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department, authorities still had no suspect and no person of interest. They had a crime scene, a victim's blood, and a missing elderly woman who couldn't walk 50 yards on her own. And what they didn't have were the answers. The first ransom note arrived before the blood at the crime scene had even dried out. On February 2nd, just 1 day after Nancy's disappearance. Cold TV, a CBS affiliate in Tucson, reported that it received a letter demanding payment for Nancy Guthrie's release. The letter reportedly contained specific details about Nancy's home and what she was wearing. The investigators took this note seriously. They shared it with the FBI and they requested that its content not to be publicly disclosed. The only question that haunted them: was this letter from the actual kidnapper, or was it from someone that's just trying to take advantage of a family's tragedy? The following day, TMZ reported its own ransom note, this one demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin, complete with cryptocurrency addresses and a deadline. Harvey Levine, the founder of TMZ, would later claim that he received multiple communications, including one that stated Nancy was alive but scared. The use of Bitcoin was significant. Cryptocurrency is notoriously difficult to trace. Transactions can be conducted anonymously, and funds can be moved across borders without traditional banking oversight. For a kidnapper seeking ransom, it represented the digital equivalent of unmarked bills in a briefcase. On February 5th, Savannah Guthrie and her siblings released a video statement that acknowledged the ransom reports for the first time. We too have heard the reports about the ransom letter in the media. As a family, we are doing everything that we can. We are ready to talk. However, we live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know that without a doubt she is alive and that you have her. We want to hear from you and we are ready to listen. Please reach out to us. This message was carefully crafted, open to negotiation but demanding proof of life. In kidnapping cases, proof of life is crucial. Without it, a family cannot know if they are negotiating with the actual captors or simply being extorted by criminals. However, one demand stood apart from the rest. A message sent to a local media outlet claiming to be from the actual kidnappers themselves. They set a deadline of February 9th. Pay $6 million in Bitcoin by 5 p.m. or face the consequences. On February 7th, Savannah and her siblings released another video which was more desperate than the last. We received your message and we understand. We beg of you, now return our mother to us. This is very valuable to us and we will pay you. We will pay you. 4 words that signaled a family's willingness to do whatever it takes to bring their mother home. But as February 9th came and went, no payment was made because no clear communication channel had been established. Plus, the family had no way to verify if the ransom demands were actually legitimate. The deadline passed. Without incident, no proof of life, no further communications from the actual kidnapper, just silence and an elderly woman still missing. And then on February 10th came the break investigators have been waiting for. FBI Director Kash Patel released 4 grainy images to social media. Images that have been recovered from Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera despite the kidnapper's attempt to tamper with the device. The images showed a masked individual wearing gloves and a backpack standing outside of Nancy's front door at 2:12 a.m. on the morning that she disappeared. Analysis revealed that the intruder was armed and what appeared to be a handgun which was visible on a holster. The footage was chilling. Here was a person who had in all likelihood taken Nancy Guthrie from her home. He moved with purpose, approaching the camera directly rather than trying to avoid it, and he knew it was there and he knew how to disable it. 41 minutes. That's how long the entire operation appears to have taken. From the first approach to the disconnection of Nancy's pacemaker, in less than an hour, someone has disabled the security system, entered a home, subdued and incapacitated a elderly woman, and transported her away, all without leaving a clear trail. 2 days later, on February 12th, the FBI released additional information and footage. The suspect was described as a man with average build standing approximately from 5'9" to 5'10" inches tall. He was carrying a Ozark Trail hiker backpack. Alongside this new information came double the reward, $100,000 for information leading to Nancy's location or the arrest of those responsible. The FBI was betting that someone somewhere would recognize the man in the footage, and the money would loosen the tongues. Savannah Guthrie shared the images on her Instagram account with a simple devastating caption, "We believe she is still alive. Bring her home." In kidnapping cases, time is enemy. Statistics tell a grim story. The longer a victim remains missing, the lower the likelihood of a safe recovery. For an 84-year-old woman with chronic health conditions requiring daily medications, every passing hour diminishes the chances of finding her alive. Nancy Guthrie depending on medication that she didn't have. Her pacemaker, which was disconnected at 2:30 a.m., needed to be monitored. If she was being held somewhere, if she was still alive, her captors would need to provide medical care that few kidnappers are equipped to give. "We are at a desperate hour. We need your help. We believe our mom is still out there. She was taken and we don't know where. And we need your help." By February 9th, more than a week passed since Nancy's disappearance. The ransom deadline had come and gone with no resolution. Despite the FBI's involvement, despite the national media's attention, despite the 100,000 reward, investigators were no closer to finding her. The FBI released a statement. "We are not aware of any continued communication between Guthrie family and the suspected kidnappers. Nor have we identified a suspect or a person of interest in this case at this time." It was a remarkable admission. With all the resources of world's most powerful law enforcement agencies, investigators had no suspect, no clear leads, and no communication from anyone who could have definitely proved that Nancy Guthrie was held somewhere. But that evening something happened that suggested the investigation might be closer to a breakthrough than the FBI was letting on. In Rio Rico, Arizona, 60 miles south from Tucson, near the Mexican border, a person of interest was detained from the following traffic stop. Rio Rico was just 20 miles from the international border of Mexico. The location was significant. If Nancy Guthrie has been taken across the border, recovering her would be impossible and very complicated, potentially involving international negotiations and foreign law enforcement agencies. Shortly after the traffic stop, the PCSD and the FBI executed a search warrant on a property and a vehicle at the same area. It seemed like the break the investigators needed, but by the morning the excitement has evaporated. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that the individual has been released without charges. He had been fully cooperative and following an interview and forensic review was determined not to be involved in the disappearance. He was, in law enforcement terminology, ruled out as a suspect. On February 13th, another flurry of activity. This time just 2 miles away from Nancy Guthrie's home, roads were closed. 2 people were removed from the residence and a Range Rover was seized from a nearby restaurant. And once again the hopes were dashed. One of the individuals was questioned and released by the following day. No arrests were made, no charges were filed. One significant development did emerge. Sources told ABC News that the investigators were leaning away from Guthrie family as suspects in cases involving wealthy family and ransom demands. It's standard procedure to examine the family members really closely. But if not the family, then who? Perhaps more importantly, why? And what possible motive could explain the abduction of an 84-year-old woman with limited mobility and no obvious enemies? Then came the glove. On February 16, no more than 2 weeks since Nancy Guthrie's vanishing, investigators have been systematically searching the area around her home, looking for any evidence of the kidnappers or what they have discarded. In the roadside brush about 2 miles from Nancy's residence, they found what they were looking for: a glove. More specifically, a glove that was worn by the suspect who was captured on Nancy's doorbell camera. The Pima County Sheriff's Department sent the glove to a private laboratory in Florida for a DNA analysis, which would represent the investigation's most significant forensic breakthrough. But once the analysis was lifted from the DNA, it was of an unknown profile. An unknown male profile. Unknown meaning it wasn't in any existing databases, but it was of a male. Unidentifiable, however, but connected to the area where Nancy Guthrie was taken. But here's the thing, investigators didn't just find one glove, they collected 16 from various different areas near Nancy's house. Most were eventually discarded as irrelevant probably dropped by people who had no connection to the crime. But the one that mattered the most was the one with the male DNA. But from there on, the trail goes cold. They had accomplished what should have been nearly impossible, taking an elderly woman from her home in an affluent, security conscious neighborhood without being seen by a single witness. Some have speculated about the Mexican border, just 60 miles from south. If Nancy was taken across the international lines, recovering her would be impossible. Others have wondered about professional criminals, perhaps a crew that specializes in targeting families of wealth or famous individuals. But the professional kidnappers typically establish clear communications through channel or ransom payments. They would provide proof of life. The chaos of multiple unverified ransom notes suggested something else. To better understand what might have happened to Nancy Guthrie, it's worth examining how criminal profilers and kidnap specialists might approach this case. This case shows elements of organization, the knowledge of the security camera, the planning, the approaching of the time in the middle of the night, the use of gloves and masks, the blood left on the scene, the discarded glove, the failure to establish clear communication. This contradiction, planning versus sloppiness, could suggest several scenarios. Perhaps the kidnappers were experienced at breaking into houses but new to holding hostages. Perhaps something went wrong during the abduction, leading to injury and hurried exits. According to FBI data, kidnapping for ransom is relatively rare in the United States, far more common in countries with weak law enforcement or high corruption. When ransom kidnappings do occur in America, they typically target wealthy individuals or family members, and they typically involve sophisticated criminal organizations. The good news, if there can be any, is that ransom kidnappings have a relatively high survival rate when families cooperate with demands. The bad news: without clear communication, without proof of life, without established terms, the situation remains dangerously volatile. This raises an uncomfortable question. What if ransom wasn't the primary motive? What if the ransom notes were just a smokescreen either from the actual kidnapper or the opportunists, while the real purpose of the abduction was something entirely different? Some have speculated about grudges, perhaps someone with grievances about Savannah Guthrie's journalism, or against the family for unknown reason. Others have wondered about mental illnesses, a stalker or delusional individual fixated on a public figure's family. But speculation without evidence is dangerous. What we know for certain is that Nancy Guthrie has been taken from her home against her will. She has most likely been injured in the process, and despite these massive investigation resources, she still has not been found. The FBI's $100,000 reward suggests the investigators believe that someone out there knows something. In cases like this, breakthrough often comes not from forensic evidence but from human sources. Someone who recognizes the suspect, notices suspicious behavior, or simply decides that the reward is more valuable than their silence. Somewhere in Arizona, or perhaps far beyond, there are answers to questions that have haunted a family and captivated a nation. Cases like Nancy Guthrie's remind us of the uncomfortable truths about the world we live in. Security cameras can be disabled, locked doors can be breached, the safety we assume in our own home, especially in our quiet neighborhoods, is more fragile than we want to believe. According to the US, approximately 14 million Americans over the age of 65 live alone. Most will never face anything like Nancy Guthrie experienced, but her case has forced more families to reconsider how they protect their vulnerable loved ones. Nancy Guthrie had a security camera, but without a subscription to the cloud storage, the footage wasn't immediately accessible. She had a pacemaker that was connected to her phone but was removed. Technology can help us, but it has its limits. Perhaps the most striking element of this case is how it united people, law enforcement from multiple agencies to work together. Media competitors cooperating to amplify the family's appeals, strangers across the country praying for a woman that they never met, touched by daughter's desperate plea to bring her mother home. To this day, a $100,000 reward awaits for anyone who can provide information for leading to Nancy's location or the arrest of who those are. That's life-changing money. It's being offered because the investigators believe someone out there still holds the key. If you see anything, if you hear anything, if there's anything at all that seems strange to you, please report it to the law enforcement. Savannah's words echo across the country, a daughter's voice reaching out of desperation because somewhere someone is watching this video who knows something. Someone who perhaps have been wrestling with their consciousness, unsure whether to come forward or not. She deserves to be found. Her family deserves answers, and the person responsible for her disappearance deserves to face justice. Stories without endings are waiting to be completed. This one can also have an ending with the mother coming home. This is the unfortunate story of Nancy Guthrie. If you have made it to the end of the video and if you are new here, please consider subscribing. And if you have any thoughts on the case, theories or even any details that I miss, please feel free to drop them in the comments. And thank you for watching.